Hello and a very warm welcome back. You're watching live from Paris here on France 24. These are today's top stories. A yay for Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement bill, but a nay to his fast-track Brexit timetable. The British Prime Minister reluctantly pauses the divorce legislation with just days to go until his ruling Conservatives want the UK to leave the European Union. We'll be speaking live to our London correspondent, Bénédicte Paviot. Moscow and Ankara clinch a deal that they hope will end the bloodshed in northern Syria. President Erdogan gives Kurdish fighters a 150-hour window to down weapons and retreat 30 kilometers from the Turkish border. And an apology from Pinera after days of riots and unrest. The Chilean president recognizes there's been a lack of vision as he unveils a stack of social measures, including a 20% increase to basic pensions and a freeze on electricity tariffs. Also coming up for you this hour, in business, Yuka Huaye will be telling us more about Amazon's new warehouse in the Paris suburbs, where the online retail giant has hired more robots to make the working day a little easier. And we'll be taking you back to Paradise, California, a community blackened a year ago by the US state's worst ever wildfire. Do stay with us. Live from Paris continues here on France 24. After suffering 3 defeats in Westminster since Saturday, the British Prime Minister may well be wanting to rename the House of Commons the House of Rejection. After giving Boris Johnson preliminary approval for his Brexit withdrawal bill on Tuesday evening, lawmakers then went on to vote down his 3-day fast-track timetable. The Conservative leader told MPs that he was disappointed that they've plumped for another delay to the divorce, while the leader of the Labour opposition said Johnson is simply the orchestrator of this entire calamity. Well, for more, we can bring in our UK correspondent, Bénédicte Paviot, who's following events for us. Bénédicte, this was clearly an up and down session in the House of Commons on Tuesday evening as the government continues to ride this Brexit rollercoaster.
Yes, it is a Brexit roller coaster for politicians, for investors, for voters, for the country. And of course, also, what must not be forgotten is it's not just the UK. It involves the 27 other EU countries. So a moment of triumph, a real victory, the first Prime Minister to win the approval which is legally required of the House of Commons in that first vote last night, where MPs by a majority of 30 voted in favour on the principle of the withdrawal agreement bill, WAB, as it is known here. And let's remember that this has all been very quick already because Boris Johnson did what many of his critics, either within his party or let alone in the opposition, said he could never do, the mission impossible of striking a new Brexit deal. He did that last Thursday with the 27 other countries in the EU. So, yes, that was a significant victory, but moments later, in what was an important second vote, the planned timetable that his government proposed was rejected by a majority of 14. And that, most MPs said, was because it simply did not allow enough time to scrutinise that Brexit New Deal. And although a lot of it was similar to Theresa May, the previous Prime Minister's deal, there were significant changes. And really, MPs want a chance to read it, analyse it, and ask many questions about it. So that was a real defeat. And as a result, the Prime Minister said he was pressing the pause button.
And just on that note, Bénédicte, as we look ahead, the ball is now very much in the European Union's court, with Boris Johnson's hands tied somewhat as the Conservatives now play a waiting game. What can they do next?
Well, yes, focus now here from the United Kingdom across the water very much towards the 27 other EU countries and Brussels. Interesting that Donald Tusk, the president of the EU Council, seems to indicate that his preferred manner of dealing with, let's remember that extension that reluctantly the Prime Minister was compelled to do in a letter, or it turned out several letters, on Saturday, requesting an extension till the 31st of January in order to comply with the Benn Act, the British law that says that if there is no deal by the 19th of October, which was Saturday, then he had to do so. It will be important to see what extension is granted by the EU when that answer comes and how long that extension is for. Donald Tusk seemed to indicate shortly after the vote in the House of Commons that he was going to recommend that 3-month extension till the end of January. It is clear from what the Prime Minister said before that defeat. He had said that if MPs rejected that and said no to that, then he would call and push for a general election. His problem is that it is not in his gift. He needs 2/3 of MPs to vote for that, and they are clearly not minded to do so. So I think we are closer to a general election before Christmas. Many people won't see that as a Christmas present, but certainly that's, it seems, very much what Boris Johnson could be pushing for. Or could he surprise everybody and try and push yet another try in the House of Commons, that timetable? There is an offer on the table shortly after that defeat. The leader of the main opposition party, the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, said that he was prepared to sit down with the Prime Minister and look at what he called a sensible timetable for the scrutiny of this Brexit New Deal. What seems clear, the certainty and destiny of Brexit is not clear, but what seems clear is that it's highly improbable that the UK will leave the EU by the 31st of October in, 8 days' time.
OK, Benedict Pavio, our correspondent there in London, thank you very much. To some other world news now. At noon local time this Wednesday, Turkey will start the clock. President Erdogan is giving Kurdish YPG militants in northern Syria 150 hours to pull back their fighters and weapons to a position 30 kilometres from the Turkish border. This new deadline is the cornerstone of a deal struck between Erdogan and Russia after talks in Sochi. That breakthrough came just hours before a 5-day US brokered pause in fighting expired. Let's listen now to some of the Turkish president's statement.
Starting at noon on Wednesday, October 23rd, and within 150 hours, YPG terrorists, along with their military equipment, will be removed from the area within a depth of 30 kilometres. Their fortifications and positions will be destroyed. All YPG terrorists, as well as their military equipment in Tel Rifat and Manbij, will also be removed.
Well, France 24's Clovis Casali has more now on what the deal means for Syria's Kurds.
The Turkish offensive in northeastern Syria has led to a shift in the balance of power in the area, with Russia more than ever the key player. The Kurdish fighters of the YPG, considered as terrorists by Turkish leader Erdogan, on the other hand, have lost territory. They feel betrayed by their US allies and abandoned by the international community. The Kurdish fighters with the United States had been battling Daesh, the so-called Islamic group, and the Kurdish fighters are still in charge of the detention centers in northern Syria, with thousands of ISIS fighters. But the Kurdish Red Crescent has now warned that the Kurdish fighters are no longer able to maintain security in these detention centers. Furthermore, there are still ISIS cells in the area, and they say that the world can no longer expect the Kurdish fighters to go after these ISIS cells. Regarding the humanitarian situation on the ground, it's worsening, with the Kurdish Red Crescent saying that 500,000 civilians are without running water, and they have very strong words for the international community, with the organization saying it has lost all trust in the humanity of the international community.
Now, from the members of the EU to the nations of the Arab League, foreign governments have shown their support for Lebanon's latest stack of emergency reforms. But those ambassadors have also warned Prime Minister Hariri that the demands of demonstrators must be listened to and that security forces should refrain from using violence to control those ongoing rallies, with protests gripping much of the country for a sixth consecutive day on Tuesday. Our team has been to film amid the crowds in the country's second biggest city of Tripoli.
We're in the heart of Tripoli tonight, in a city that is normally a bastion of support for the Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri. But today, tens of thousands of people are out in the streets demanding his government falls.
We want all of them to leave. We can't support any of them anymore because they're all sending the same message. None of them is better than the other.
We demand the politicians retire, take a break, we need new blood, new faces. Actually, I'm grateful to the politicians because they united us. They pushed us out to the streets as one people with one goal.
The protest is great. We are happy to be here, but the politicians need to give us back the money they stole.
It's half a protest and half a party here tonight, but these people aren't happy. Saad al-Hariri made several concessions yesterday, but these people are still adamant he needs to go, as does his entire government.
It's time now for a quick look at some of the day's other world news. They've held the presidency and a majority of seats in parliament since 1965, but the fortunes of the Botswana Democratic Party could well change this Wednesday as the African nation heads to the polls. 924,000 registered voters will elect 57 MPs and 490 local officials. Support for the BDP has waned, with the country's biggest opposition parties, that's the Botswana National Front and the Botswana Congress Party, joining forces. The Catholic faithful have been the latest group in Haiti to call for the president to step down. Thousands gathered outside a church in the capital Port-au-Prince on Tuesday to say that Jovenel Moise is not fit for office. Protests against his rule have taken place frequently in recent weeks, with a national petrol shortage in August adding to that malaise. And the political outsider who triumphed in Tunisia's presidential election will be sworn into office before Parliament this Wednesday. The 61-year-old law professor Kais Saied beat the media mogul Nabil Karoui in the second-round runoff earlier this month. Nicknamed Robocop for his stern manner, he won with over 70% of the ballot with his pledge to build a new Tunisia. Now, a day after Donald Trump called on his Republican Party to get tough and do more to fight their rivals that he labelled as being vicious, Democrats have ploughed on with their impeachment proceedings against the president. Washington's top diplomat in Ukraine was grilled by House committees in a closed-door session on Capitol Hill on Tuesday. And as William Taylor was giving evidence, Trump likened the whole affair to a lynching. Earlier, we spoke to the Guardian newspaper's Washington bureau chief. This is what David Smith had to say.
Bill Taylor, a seasoned diplomat, several decades in service, currently the top diplomat for the Americans in Ukraine as acting ambassador. He talked about his dealings with Gordon Sondland, the US ambassador to the European Union, and basically what emerged was very specific details of an allegation that the US would only give President Zelensky of Ukraine a meeting in the Oval Office and, more importantly, hundreds of millions of dollars of military aid if Ukraine publicly announced an investigation into a gas company on which Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was a board member. In other words, one of Trump's key political rivals in the 2020 election. The president has consistently denied there was any quid pro quo, but here was a very senior American diplomat laying it out in quite rich detail. Also alleging in his evidence that the administration was running a secret unofficial back channel, not going through the proper diplomatic channels, but actually this channel involving Rudy Giuliani, Trump's personal lawyer, Rick Perry, the energy secretary, and others. Not really the way diplomacy should be done, he alleged. All this evidence today, certainly, I think, stunned Democrats, and it produced a sharp denial from the White House, the press secretary, claiming it's a smear job by far left-wingers. Trump himself claiming it was a lynching, and there was quite a backlash against that comment too.
OK, we take you now to one Californian community with a now ironic name. The town of Paradise was nearly entirely blackened a year ago in the worst wildfire in the state's history, a blaze which claimed the lives of 86 people. James Wilson looks at how locals there have picked up the pieces 12 months on.
It's not hard to find reminders of last year's wildfire in Paradise in the Northern California foothills. These crosses commemorate the town's 86 citizens who died in the disaster. Despite the rubble and debris, the town's mayor is optimistic.
I am so proud of our community because they've come together to help each other to rebuild. It's a very close, tight-knit community. And pretty much the folks here who are coming back, who are rebuilding, view themselves not as victims, not even as survivors, but as pioneers.
26,000 people called Paradise home, but the population is now only 4,000. Last year, the trees in the area helped the fire race across 26,000 hectares of land, and since then 100,000 have been cut down. Strident regulations also apply to the new homes in the area, including mandatory fire-resistant gutters and a ban on wooden fences.
I think we're going to be a nice little town of about 5,000 people in a year and a half from now, and we'll continue to grow.
The focus is now on attracting young families to the area, all in the hope that one day the town will resemble again the 26,000-strong community it was before the flames engulfed it.
Moving on, Chile's president has tried to douse the recent flames of discontent there by unveiling a string of social measures. Sebastián Piñera has given an address to the nation in which he's admitted that there has been a lack of vision on the part of his government. At least 15 people are now known to have died in the rioting, clashes and arson attacks, which have been sparked by the rising cost of living there. This is the apology the president has given.
Es verdad.
It is true that the problem we are facing did not suddenly appear in recent days. They have been building for several decades, and the various different governments over the years haven't and cannot realize the size and gravity of this situation. This level of inequality and abuse has led to a genuine and sincere reaction from millions and millions of Chileans. I recognize this lack of vision and ask for forgiveness.
Y le pido perdón a mis compatriotas.
OK, you're watching live from Paris. These are the headlines for you this hour. A yay for Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement bill, but a nay to his fast-track Brexit timetable. The British Prime Minister reluctantly pauses the divorce legislation with just days to go until his ruling Conservatives want the UK to leave the European Union. And Moscow and Ankara clinch a deal that they hope will end the bloodshed in northern Syria. President Erdogan gives Kurdish fighters a 150-hour window to down weapons and retreat 30 kilometers from the Turkish border.